Good evening on behalf of Marlborough College and its president, Mr. Kevin Quickly. I would like to welcome you here. My name is Ishaq or Isaac Shaul. I am the chairman of the Windham World Affairs Council, and I know another chairman of this council has appeared here tonight. Where is he? Yeah, he's hiding there. Welcome again. So tonight we are honored to present to you a distinguished speaker, Mr. Kirk Talbott. He will be better introduced to you by Kevin in a moment. Marlborough, welcome again to the second talk in the Windham World Affairs Council and Marlborough series called Engaging the World. This series is based on a Marlborough College seminar course designed by Marlborough College President, Dr. Kevin Quickly. President Quickly has invited leading experts to Marlborough College to the seminar, and the college is partnering with Windham World Affairs Council to offer this matching speaker series to the community, giving us the opportunity to hear the same expert as the students. And I hope you will enjoy this speaker as you did the speaker last Wednesday. Before we introduce to you our distinguished speaker, I would very much like to take a moment and inform you and give you a few words about our next event, which will take place on Friday evening, March 15 at 118 Eliot. You all have heard about Holocaust. In Maine, there is a professor who has located 6 individuals who have survived Holocaust, and he had made a great documentary about them that he has shared with many people in his community in Maine, and he has accepted our invitation to come here. It will be a talk and a screening of a multimedia presentation entitled War, the House is Still Standing. Maine survivors and liberators remember the Holocaust. The film will be presented by its creator, as I said, Mr. Robert Katz, a lawyer and a great professor of art at the University of Maine at Augusta, Maine, and past president and currently a member of the board of directors of the Holocaust and Human Rights Center of Maine. Mr. Katz has created this innovative video acoustic installation project, which is on permanent display at the center, in addition to the showing of the film. Mr. Katz will present a compelling talk about family remembrance and the Holocaust. Now, permit me to introduce Kevin Quickly to introduce our distinguished speaker.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. It's really great to be with you tonight. I wanted to thank Ishaq and Rosalind for organizing this, Scott for again opening this wonderful space for us to have this conversation. My colleague, Jennifer Giroux, who passed along some feedback. She said, we know, the audience knows we have some students from Marlborough here. They'd love to find some ways to engage the students. So the students have a heads up, as does Kirk, that maybe the first question will be theirs tonight. So we shall see how that goes, but looking forward to that. And I just want to say a few words about Kirk. And the first word I want to say is just a remarkable demonstration of commitment. You know, we know a lot of life is about showing up. So we made this arrangement that Kirk would come up here, Kirk, about 4 months ago? So when Kirk was looking at the weather, he saw, oh my goodness, it looks like we're going to have some bad weather. So yesterday he shifted his flight to the first flight in the morning, thinking he could get out in time. And then he emailed me last night and said, no, you never get out of time before the storm. And he said, the first flight was canceled. So Kirk got up about 4 this morning, headed to BWI to get on the train, took that to New Haven, got across to the train to Springfield, jumped in an Uber, went to Bradley where he had rented a car, drove up, has been on campus all afternoon. We had a class at 4:30, and he's here tonight. So that's just remarkable demonstration, and we're all really grateful for that. So I learned from Kirk, too, that you shouldn't set the bar too high. So now I have to be a little more critical. But he just said I should say 3 things about him, but I'm going to say 4. So the 3 is you've seen his bio. He's got a really broad background, working with a variety of organizations that work on environmental issues, on land use issues, and he's worked all around the world. He works as an advisor with the World Bank on their tenure project, tenure rights that relates to the rights of indigenous people to their land, and he also serves as an advisor to the Mid-ER network. So really a breadth of experience. The 4th thing I wanted to mention is because this is the Windham World Affairs Council, for a short time, Kirk was the president of the National Association of the 90 or so World Affairs Councils all around. So this is a very familiar audience to Kirk, and I'd like to say, Kirk, welcome back home. And also, a 5th thing, Kirk had been an experimenter, so he knows the world of SIT and the experiment in international living. So welcome back to Brattleboro, and welcome back to the Windham World Affairs Council. Okay.
Is this on, and can you hear me? Okay, I can usually project, but Al, who I'd also like to thank, has asked for me to use this, and it will be just this way at the beginning. So let me just start by echoing some thanks to, well, I guess, Scott, starting with you and for the place we're in. And we're going to be talking about tenure and property rights tonight, along with transparency and corruption. And so we should pay homage to the location. And thank you for welcoming us here tonight. And also thank you, of course, to the Windham World Affairs Council, to Isaac and Rosaline and Jennifer. Thank you for inviting me, all of you, for coming on a snowy evening. Really appreciate it. And I'm fond of the World Affairs Councils particularly. I mean, the best part of my job when I was working briefly in the network 10 years or so ago was just the pleasure of going and visiting and listening to and learning from the councils. It's fabulous. It's something that changes the world. It's just terrific. So it's great to be back here, and I'd also want to shout out to Lamia, Lucia, Adam, and Stacy. Can you raise your hands? Who are my reason for being here today, because we just had a really nice discussion, and I'm really glad that they came here, and they're going to kick off maybe some of our discussions. But thanks for coming and for making this worthwhile. So I know we have a special group here tonight. How many people have been outside of North America in their lifetimes? Yeah. How many have worked overseas, actually worked overseas? Wow. Okay. How many have been to Bukit in Sumatra? Anybody? Okay, good. Good. Wait, you have? You have?
About an hour ago.
Oh, yeah, right. Oh, yeah. Okay. So we've got quite a crowd. I've met a few of you tonight. So if, with your permission, since we're going to go quickly, but I just wanted to take 20 or 30 seconds to do a quick Qigong exercise with you all. You can do it sitting down. Do I have your permission? Yes. Good, okay. So let's just everybody stay sitting down. Lift from the top of your head, suspend from the top of the head, and put your hands out as if you're holding a heavy textbook. Watch out for your elbows. You're not poking any neighbor. Hold the heavy textbook and breathe through the nose. Good. Now put the weight of the textbook into your shoulder blades and down into the seat, into the earth. Feel the vertebrae hang from the top of the head like a string of pearls. Bring your hands in to your center. Get centered. Get balanced. Up to the sky. Feel the electricity. Bring it down through us. Feel the magnetism of the earth and bring it back up. Textbook. Namaste. And into this posture. Okay, now we're ready to combat corruption. Good. You know, I'm delighted to be back in New England because I went to high school here, I went to college here, I went to tennis camp at Loomis School back in the early 60s or sometime. Yeah. What's that? Attrition, there you go. Oh, okay, they're patriot. Oh my God, okay. Well, patricians are attritions, okay, anyway. So I was also in the experiment, as Kevin mentioned, and I've also visited your jail here in Brattleboro. Yeah, so I'm serious. So I'm just going to tell you this. It's really long ago, it's long past when the statute of limitations have expired. I was a leader with the experiment. We were going to Switzerland. Right before we went, I talked our way into getting a van from the experiment and took our group of kids out to enjoy the cultural life here in Brattleboro. And then we went out to a state park to end the evening, and we weren't supposed to be there after dark, and the police came and arrested us and threw all of us into jail here in Brattleboro. And the experiment leader came and bailed us out, and it was actually a very civil, pleasant experience. So it's great to be back here in Brattleboro. True story. So Bill McGibbon lives up the road. This is a hub of environmentalism worldwide and the home of town meetings. So I've added the subtitle to our talk on transparency and corruption, the subtitle of Community-Based Resource Management and Our Climate Change Crisis. Community-Based Resource Management. So when I say CBRM, so I don't keep saying Community-Based Resource Management, right? CBRM, Community-Based Resource Management and Our Climate Change Crisis. I say our, right? So CBRM offers both a path towards ecological health, and it helps us combat corruption by providing transparency and good governance. So to help give us a location for tonight, I'm going to look at Bukit Sumatra, which is near Singapore, middle of the northern part of Sumatra, which is a place that I visited on a 12-month trip around the world in 1979 after I worked in a steel mill and then got a backpack, wanted to see the world. And this was a remarkable spot with the matriarchal society of the Minangkabau people, about 5 million of them, living on the volcanic slopes with their incredibly rich culture and biodiversity. It had a magic to it. In the evenings, often we would hear tigers roar from the forested slopes. The Minangkabau practice community-based resource management. They had animal husbandry, watershed management. They shared in a lot of the common property management. And as we'll say later, we're not going to romanticize it. But what's happened is that the plunder of the forest and marine ecosystems that followed the fall of the Jakarta regime brought logging rates with over 1 million hectares in Sumatra, in Kalimantan each, cut until recently those logging rates have declined only because there are few trees left. The tigers hide in near extinction. Palm oil plantations have reached industrial scale across Indonesia and much of the world. So we all know that we live in an anxious and uncertain, unprecedented time. Just 1 second while I take this down so it doesn't fall. And we can paraphrase E.O. Wilson, the biologist down in Boston. Has anybody here heard of E.O. Wilson? He's really fabulous. He's still alive, and I've had the privilege of working with him a little bit. And he talked about our Paleolithic emotions, our medieval institutions, and our God-like technological powers. It's a dangerous brew. I offer no panacea, but I do hope in the next 15 to 20 minutes to explore how CBRM can help tackle corruption and avert climate change. Not avert climate change, avert climate change catastrophe. If we add into the equation that 2/3 of humanity live in corrupt countries, according to Transparency International, an excellent group, in an increasingly crowded world with limited resources, we know there's no easy way out. And I don't offer any easy way out, but rather I want us to follow a property rights path that's relevant internationally towards our better selves and a better future. So let's put on our seatbelts and here we go. Let's start with some definitions. Corruption. Dishonest or fraudulent conduct by those entrusted with a position of authority. Fraud requires intent, a deception deliberately done to gain illicitly. We generally know it when we see it. Honesty and integrity, or the lack thereof, really determine our lives and our livelihoods. Transparency brings scrutiny. It discourages graft and corruption. You shine the lights and the rats run. Transparency implies openness, communication, supports accountability. Accountability means taking responsibility for your behavior, pure and simple. Good governance depends not just on accountability and transparency, but on representation by stakeholders in decision making. And fourth, equity, fairness in the distribution of benefits and responsibilities. If you have these four foundational cornerstones of good governance, once again, accountability, transparency, representation, and fairness, equity, you have the conditions for success anywhere, any sector, anytime. That's my opinion. Now, we'll have some debate on that. We already did with our four extraordinary students here. Unfortunately, millennia of civilization has done little to curb greed, dishonesty, and taking unfair advantage of position or power. Does anybody disagree with that? Corruption flourishes when given an opening. The age of smartphones and artificial intelligence, which scares the heck out of me, not alone, but in terms of what we tend to do with our godlike technological powers, in terms of our lack of restraint, has only heightened the cat and mouse tension between transparency and corruption. Now, let's get some historical context. Since the end of World War II, we've seen hard-won rise and a pretty depressing recent decline in democracies. Stoking fear and exploiting resentments is the calling card for dictators. Can you hear me okay? Are we good? Stoking fear and exploiting resentments has long been the calling card of dictators. The ascent of authoritarians from Putin to Bolsonaro in Brazil to Duterte in the Philippines has accompanied the demise of the Arab Spring and the end of term limits for president for life, Xi. Fractures and divides grow across the internet and the continents in a world of accelerating change and uncertainty. While Indonesia has enjoyed a political opening, corruption has remained endemic. The ecology has been undermined by the resource curse, natural resource wealth inspiring rent-seeking, collusion. Timber, oil, gas, mining, palm oil conglomerates are playing a major role. Local resource users have little choice but to participate. Around the world, they live in deep-rooted systems based on graft-weak enforcement, informal economies, and paying off low-salaried government officials. Is this true or not? Is this kind of true? Your experience working overseas? Ever looked at how much those guards make in the national parks versus the poachers? Martin Wolf of the Financial Times helps us navigate the failing marriage between capitalism and democracy. Mass education, communications, and the mobilization for industrialized warfare in the earliest 20th century strengthened the demand for political inclusiveness and a global system. The 1930s financial debacle completely undermined and wreaked havoc on globalization, igniting poverty, fear, anger, insecurity. Sound familiar? Well, it should, because fast forward to the shock waves of 2008 that are still being felt today. Wolf emphasizes that democracy requires the confidence and trust that winners will not use their powers to destroy the losers. We stare at gaping inequities in which 26 men own half the world's wealth today. Walmart consolidates markets. Amazon eliminates competitors. State apparatus in Russia, China support bullied capitalism. Oligarchs stretch their goal. Excuse me, I'm getting excited. I'll slow down. Oligarchs stretch their global reach, monetize political connections. Remember small is beautiful, anybody? It reminds us, here's a quote from Schumacher, excessive wealth like power corrupts. Enter 15-year-old Greta Thunberg calling out world leaders at Davos in Poland. Quote, you still have the same bad ideas that got us in this mess. It's time to pull the emergency brake. 50 years ago, Rachel Carson, who lived down the road from where I live, did you know that? She lives right down the road. Right. She wrote Silent Spring. It resonated with the first Earth Days. By the 1990s, we worried about ozone, biodiversity loss, and this kind of thing. But we thought doomsday scenarios stretched out 100 years or into science fiction. Yet within the last decade, we read increasingly disturbing reports of polar ice caps melting, sea levels rising, warming oceans. We have leveled assault on the animal kingdom. Even the insect. You know about this, right? Do people know about what's happening with insects? 40% decline in insects in some places. It's just, they're calling it the windshield wipe effect. It's frightening. The last UN report, 12 years before doomsday for this environment. And what you said, we said, oh no, not possible. Well, think about it. Think about the climate. Think about the atmospheric systems. Think about what's happening with the ocean. Think about the fires in California. So what does Greta's call out have to do with transparency and corruption? Everything. As each day our planet heats up with more energy and options narrow every day for our carbon-based economy. we can expect draconian rationing of limited natural resources, increasing conflicts, social unrest, pandemics, accompanied by further rise of populism, authoritarianism, and worse. Yet we do have time to act and make a huge difference whether the planet's warm 2, 3, 4 degrees. Our best bet hinges on the 4 principles of good governance. Restoring balance in capitalism through community and sustainability ethos. And one of the key ingredients is community-based resource management. So we're going to touch on that now, return to Greta, and get on to discussion in a while. But we're going to start here a little bit to plant the flag, okay, of what is going on with Western property law. So when Magellan in 1521 planted the flag in one of those islands in the Philippines, he claimed to have appropriated all of Filipino forebear sovereignty and property rights. This bold declaration set in motion centuries of colonial usurpation of native lands. It was 400 years ago, a little over a century ago, that U.S. Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes in Carino versus Insular Government, and we lawyers always like to cite at least one case when we give a talk. So that's the only one, affirmed that land occupied in the Philippines since time immemorial was never public land. This ruling, in a stroke of a pen, established private community tenure rights for indigenous peoples. You remember we talked about public, private, individual, group. In the West, private, individual, right? Here, it was private, group, community-based land rights, common property rights. Ancestral domain was also established. Western property law posits that all legal relationships are not based on this ancestral domain and common property. All legal relationships are based on relationship between people. This pen and I, this pen and you have no legal relationship. It's our relationship vis-a-vis each other and this pen or this forest or this water. So in customary and traditional law, indigenous peoples and others have a view of nature, and nature is endowed. There was even a study, a legal study, do trees have standing in legal jurisdiction? So these issues of divergent Western versus indigenous or customary practices and traditional systems remind us of Native Americans and the Minangkabau and others where traditional systems provided resilience to underserved communities and property systems had a very different basis. But we have to remember, and I want to point out my friend Bob Winterbottom. Just raise your hand for a sec, Bob, so we can see you. Okay, Bob was one of my mentors and best friends, is still, from that we worked together for many years and took me to Africa under his wing. And one of the things that Bob taught me on the ground in Cameroon and some other countries was traditional legal systems are in a legal limbo, causing often tension between resource allocation, often sowing corruption. Customary practices can exacerbate biases, sexual discrimination, violence. It's not always good. It can be really bad, right? So we don't want to romanticize all customary traditional practices. The rural community's mosaic of customary landscape management has also been hit by rapid change in industrial scale agriculture. 10 million Burmese out of 60 million are landless right now and working as landless agricultural laborers. As religious and development and conservation NGOs race into Burma for their own mandates and missions and agendas, it'd be nice for them to remember about inclusion of local people in these projects. This struggle plays out of environmental injustice in Queens, maybe your own communities. So awareness of tradition's good and bad effects proves essential in following a nuanced, appropriate, balanced approach to land tenure that can only be supported by accountability and transparency. So a shared rights and responsibilities approach helps restore trust between former adversaries. What do we mean shared framework? When my daughter has the right to drive our car, she also has a responsibility not to crash it, right? When you get somebody a position of authority, head of a country or whatever else, they have a responsibility not to trash it or trash whatever else, right? So all rights have a concomitant responsibility. It's part of law. It's part of the balance. And we tend to forget that. People get carried away with the authority, the power they are vested with, and they forget the responsibility that's inherent in that. So securing land tenure rights is no different. So clarifying property boundaries in governance terms improves ecosystem management, delineating public and private lands by surveys, by community mapping, by presenting written evidence of community claims to the judicial system in the right timing, in the right way. These are the ways we put transparency, right, into the system, and we encourage accountability. Bringing state to custom have demonstrated success already in Indonesia, in Philippines, in Thailand. Unfortunately, most of the natural forests are gone already. So now we're into restorative. Success relies on transparent judicial proceedings, sharing cadastral data in the governing of resources. So as we look for a way forward here, Greta has helped reset the stage. She's lit a candle in the darkness with her raw, powerful, people-based message. She says, we have run out of excuses and we're running out of time. We have come here to let you know that change is coming whether you like it or not. Real power belongs to the people. In Paris, thousands have marched with yellow vests against President Macron's efforts to tax diesel. Why? Because they are protesting corporations reaping huge profits without paying their fair share. Environmental injustice plays out from Bukitingi to Birmingham to Brattleboro. Greta reminds us that our civilization, and this is a quote, is being sacrificed for the opportunity of a very small number of people to continue making enormous amounts of money while too many suffer. She echoes Martin Wolf's warning about the failure of democracy and capitalism, that they're failing progress. So in conclusion, because I really want to get into some discussion, and anything I've said here that you want to check and challenge or whatever here, I want to have a robust discussion because I know I've thrown out a lot here and I've taken the liberty to talk beyond transparency, corruption, which I really don't know that much about except in the work that I've done with Bob and others in the land tenure business internationally. But we can say this in conclusion, that the specifics of our ecological fate remain unknown. We're like a patient with a terminal disease. We suffer proportionally the consequences of denial or inaction. We tend to wait until we have to act. The absence of immediately apparent harm makes proactivity really difficult. Short-term gains trump long-term costs. CBRM offers only one piece of a much larger puzzle as we pivot away from corruption, out of balance capitalism, and climate crisis. Each of us can take measurable steps towards a better future, holding ourselves more accountable, holding our politicians and our representatives more accountable. We can change how we vote, what we consume, what we pay attention to, and what we don't pay attention to. We can change our behavior. We can change our path. From within our neighborhoods, our watersheds, our regions, let's continue creating a groundswell because we face the calling of our time, an existential crisis of our making. Here in town meetings, we know the power of us in this together. Human society has proven resilient in the past. We thrive by learning and changing. So CBRM I'm offering is just one way for good governance to enhance our chances of turning the corner from the precipice. We still have time, but let's get going. And let's start with our first question here from you guys. So thank you very much for that. Introduce yourselves, please.
My name is Adam. I'm one of the 4 Marlborough Collegers. So my question is in the vein of putting form where function is, and asking so how in the day-to-day are you incorporating these benefits of good governance practices of transparency, representation, accountability, and then you work on community business resource management. So I guess to more specify my question, what in the day-to-day do you do to ensure that you are helping others enact what you are yourself enacting?
Okay, thank you, Adam. And this continues our discussion. So, Adam, to answer that, we're going to go with our mind's eye to the Minangkabau Bukittinggi, okay, to that region to answer your question with a specific, okay? So say we're in that village and people are seen as backward, illiterate, off the grid, and easy for the Timbers Concession international business people to come in and take their land, okay? And your question is, how can we in a day-to-day way effectively combat that deep-rooted corruption? Right? Is that fair enough?
Pretty well said, yeah.
I have no idea. No. Okay. No. Okay. We have an idea, but if it was easy to do, it wouldn't be going on everywhere either, right? So, but this is what the kind of thing we can do, and maybe Bob and others and Kevin, who've had a lot of international experience, and others in this room can challenge. So I'll give you the 1 minute that we would do, and perhaps in other questions too. Train local people to learn how to utilize and apply their knowledge. For instance, folks these days are really good with this and getting GPS coordinates. Get those coordinates of the community property, of their individual properties. Put that together with a nonprofit that's in the field that probably is out there, and we know they are in Indonesia, that helps them then get the information into a format that it can help adjudicate in their favor within the system to address their insecurity of tenure and make it more secure. And by providing information, you're providing transparency, and you're providing specific information that empowers you to go into the courts and get it enforced. And by using community, the individuals who are swamped and can't do it individually, all of a sudden you have hundreds of families who can band together and use the new community-based forest management laws that do exist in Indonesia, as we mentioned at the end of the talk, to work together towards this. Is that I tried to keep to 1 minute, but does that help answer, Adam, your question? Do you want to?
Yeah, so just I guess spitting it back to you. So would you say that your raison d'etre is basically providing amicus curiae briefs to each individual little arbitration in order to be the friend of the court and help those people have the information they need to make empowered decisions?
What language were you speaking, amicus?
I spoke kind of fast. I'm sorry.
No, is that Latin, amicus? No.
A friend of the court.
It's good. It's good. It's a great question, and actually, it's a really good way to put it. I haven't heard that before. Have you, Bob? Friend of the court. Don't you like that? It's a function. Now, you said something that I like, as you saw, the Qigong and Tai Chi. And in all Tai Chi, form follows function. Every move in the form has a function for self-defense. Everything. Everything we do in the field should be the same way. Otherwise, it's wasted. Otherwise, it's not directed and purposeful. That's why we did the Qigong at the beginning, to get centered, balanced, integrated, and whole. That's what development needs. That's what the world needs. But to do it, we need to be transparent, accountable, representative, and equitable. But that's not easy. Do it in our lives, do it in our homes, do it in our watersheds every day in every way. Follow the principles of Tai Chi, follow the principles of chess, and you'll learn to play chess. Follow the principles of good governance, and we'll get somewhere here, but we better hurry up.
Yeah, I'm looking at the very place that you're discussing. And I don't hear you talking a lot about climate change, but my understanding is that that very area is going to be submerged pretty quickly. in terms of climate change. And so you're talking about local governance. Do you imagine that local governance can deal with the climate change effects in that part of the world?
Thank you, and another great question. And just in this case, the Minangkabau are quite a ways inland up on volcanic slope. But not to say that there aren't climate change. You heard about the forest fires years ago in Indonesia. Speaking of which, when my wife and I drove from Utah through Montana, Wyoming, into South Dakota, we had hundreds and hundreds of miles of clouds from forest fires just this last summer. When we were down in the Keys, 80-90% of the mangroves are dead. It's like a Mel Gibson bad film of it's horrible. But I'm just saying, so yes, it's happening everywhere, and no, you can't have a local government effectively deal with a global problem. So, but what we need is a holistic approach, because the only way we're going to get there is all the local governments, all the local organizations, groundswelling, demanding from our representatives and our governments, our public servants, to do the bidding of saving us from ourselves. Now, when we rely on governments and international agencies to do the work, look what's happened. I mean, I've spent 30, 40 years with these guys trying it, and we don't have 30 to 40 more years to keep going that route, top down. So we don't need just bottom up or top down. We need it all. We need to demand of our leadership. We need to show leadership ourselves. Yes, sir.
Suppose in the next decade or so, the world, all the people become so fearful all around the world of what's happening, that they tend to vote for someone, little mini Joseph Stalin spring up, and they do everything that Greenpeace and the Natural Resources Council and the Sierra Club and everybody, Bill McKibben and everybody's been wanting to have done for years. And they do all this thing because the people are demanding it, because they're so fearful. And they bypass normal government. In fact, they become sort of dictators, which I could see happening with the fear of people worldwide when climate change becomes so drastic and so much damage has been happened. People could actually do this and demand this sort of person, because they would employ secret police and armies to ensure that the corporations conform with what they want and, haul them in. What do you think the chances are that we could head in that direction? Because all this mentioning about people's responsibility and their duties to the environment and to proper legal means may be washed away by just rampant fear worldwide when this happens. That's something I think.
It's a really good point, and I thank you very much for that. I completely concur about the use of fear. The weaponization of fear is what dictators always do for thousands of years, and they're doing it all over the world right now. And we're going to get more of it because there's less natural resources like oil and forests and clean water and atmosphere, right? And there's more and more people for the next 20, 30 years before it starts to level out. So we're in a time of high stress. That's another symbolic reason why I did the Qigong, because Qigong is to get resilience in our own bodies and our own sense of center and selves. And so each of us can have it, but yet we felt something, a little bit of community here too in those 20 seconds, and that's powerful. So we need to be realistic. We have to be realistic about fear. What did Roosevelt say about fear? The biggest thing to fear about fear itself, or something? Well, but fear, it's nothing to fear but fear itself. That's right. So we have to. Well, whatever. I mean, these. But I think the point is, we are trained for fight or flight, and there are other options. And that's balance and composure and looking straight at what's coming that we've created. Yes, ma'am.
Let's come home and discuss the here and now, and how do we support our legislators in exposing the corruption of our administration?
Can I ask anybody else to answer that one? Yeah, I mean, I wish I knew. I mean, what a great question. I mean, I will say the obvious. Try to get engaged. Try to reach out to people.
No, come on. Give us more than that.
You've
been super analytical,
Okay,
but
but-
now we're talking about now. Apply all this great analysis to now, to the United States
I pretty much
now.
said it. I pretty much said it, which is we, in our personal behavior, what we consume, who we vote for, who we work for, what we pay attention to, what we don't pay attention to. I tried to keep within 20 minutes, but I didn't want to get political, and I only once used that T word today, right? And I used it as a verb, not
Well,
as a
I'll
noun.
use it. How
okay?
do we expose our president, Trump?
Well,
No, we have to address this.
okay, well, I've tried to steer clear of that.
You have permission to discuss this.
You get involved in the political system, just like our folks in the folks in Bukatingi. Yes, ma'am.
No, I think that
That's my best answer, is get involved as best you can. Yeah.
we're talking about local and personal involvement. And it's very difficult because of all the conflicting things that are going on. We need to concentrate on responsibility and education. If you don't give civic education to our high school students and say that information, that you could get worldwide information, but that's not enough unless you act on it and take responsibility for it. And that has to start at the community level. And when you have a society that is so obsessed with just having the best cell phone and being able to talk to somebody over there, but not going to the community meetings that make things function, you really need to concentrate on helping the educational system to help the growing student to understand what civic responsibility is.
Thank you. I really appreciate you picking up some slack from what I didn't provide. And that's a really good, but here, can I have your microphone for a second? Anything.
My name, for example? Okay, my name is Lamia. I'm from Egypt, and I'm a student/teacher in Marlborough College. So my question is, I keep going back to the 4 squares that you provided at the beginning when you said, like, individuals as a group, when they have a certain demand, but as a group, not as private individuals. Won't you think that this kind of demand would cause a threat to the government, or the government would see this kind of small society growing as a threat because they want stuff which is not going to serve in the common, interests of the government?
Yes, and I know people in the room, including someone who just spoke, who I've gotten to know a little today, who exhibited real bravery in her country, standing up to something where it's easy for me to try and answer, and I'm hesitant to, because I'm just an analyst from Washington who flew up here, and you're asking a really tough question. And I just am reminded what a tough world it is, because some other people are facing truly brutal conditions and are showing a lot more bravery and upfront action and engagement than I ever have, okay? So I'm not just, poo-pooing this. It's a really tough. So many people I've worked with in Cambodia, okay, and other places have faced real threats. Chut, you can write this down if anybody's got a pencil and Google it. Chut, C-H-U-T, Wutty, W-U-T-T-Y. He's a Cambodian who I worked with, hired on a team I was responsible for, who was murdered in Cambodia by the police for he was investigating the use of rosewood trees that's a component of ecstasy that was making $1 million a month in the Cardamom Mountains that we were trying to protect. And Chut Wudi, after I left the country, was murdered. So, I mean, okay. So these are going on right now all over the place. And somebody raised about climate change. I mean, I worked in Bikini Atoll that was done for nuclear testing. It's an absolutely beautiful atoll, 26 miles around. And we did a takings lawsuit in the U.S. Claims Court for $450 million for the takings by the U.S. government in the nuclear testings of the Bikinians' property. Okay, so an interesting case. We can talk about it later. But the point is, here 50 years later, they might lose the island anyways because of sea level rise. I think you or somebody was asking. So these are really existential. We have never faced this. I remember we were talking in the car ride over now. If we lived 1,000 years ago, brigands would have come over the hill and raped and pillaged and burned everything to the ground. So it's not a lot different, really. I mean, that was facing people day and night in a lot of times, places, and throughout history and before. So we're not in, it's always been a tough life here on this earth because we make it that way. And if civilization and progress is bringing us to the point that we can govern ourselves, we'll be okay. So I'd like maybe other folks here can, yeah.
Milton Eaton, and I've worked overseas in private and for the government, and a lot of these projections, I have to say, give astrology a good name. I have listened to disasters projected every year since I was in high school, and probably before that, and one thing you referred to was the lack of resources. Well, the Council of Rome came up with how they were going to run out of resources, and I've seen us run out of oil multiple times. Trouble is now we have more oil reserves than we've ever had. Consumption worldwide is expanding over 1 million barrels a day every year. This year it's about 1.5 million. We're fighting a battle, and there was a king once who said he would stop the tides from moving. There's going to be change, but if you're wealthy, you can adapt to it. If you are a subsistence person, you just can't. And I also, the rule of common land is quite different from individual property rights. And the common has been a disaster economically forever. But private property rights with the judicial, you at least have a chance.
No, I really appreciate, sir, thank you for your comments and your check and challenge, right? I'm trained as a lawyer, so we really like this kind of give and take and different perspectives. And we're all obviously, can respect each other while having very different opinions. I do want to thank you, though, because you've really helped make my day. You realize that? Because I read this book coming up called Collapse. Okay, it's by Jared Diamond. And it's a book this big. Jared Diamond, he got some awards. You might have heard of him. Guns, Germs, and Steel, I think. And in the Collapse, he describes multiple civilizations that have collapsed, right? You're aware of some of those, right? Right. And a lot of them have collapsed because of environmental overreach. Are you aware of that? Okay, so that's my lawyer back to you. But I do want to thank you for making me feel so much better, because somebody here is not as depressed about what's going on and worried and concerned, and you've just suggested that things are going to be just fine. Thank you. if you're rich. But I mean, the problem is that one of the problems.
Everybody in this country is rich.
Well, wait, but let me just give one little piece here of the equation that I didn't go into tonight. Bangladesh has 165 million people now, and that is the entire population of the United States when I was born. Okay? It's the size of Virginia. Every day, the country is getting smaller because of erosion, and a lot of that is because of the oil-based economy that is driving us to the precipice. Okay? Nigeria had 45 million people in 1960. It's 1/10 the size of the United States. It now has 170 million and is projected to have 400 million people in 30 years. So the wealthy, yeah, they might be able to get spaceships to go to other places, or they might be able to have enclaves somehow protected from global climate change that is coming, according to all 98% of scientists. So my question back to you would be, how do you sort of make sense then of these rising demographics worldwide and falling resources?
Well, let me just add to your demographics. They're also projecting 2.5 billion more people. Now, are you going to keep them in caves, or are they going to use energy? Progress recently, in the last 50 years anyway, you went from burning wood and dung to burning charcoal, to burning coal, to burning oil, to burning kerosene, to using electricity. And where you have the abject poor in India and Pakistan and other parts of Southeast Asia and in Africa, part of your problem is they're burning the forests and jungle to get charcoal to live and subsist. And you've got, besides that, that is where your real atmospheric problems are.
Okay, well,
I'm not talking temperature, I'm talking others.
Sure. Actually, we have, again, Bob Winterbottom has done studies for most of his life on this kind of thing. And I know in Indonesia, for example, it's the oil palm that's the massive driver. But let's get some other questions here. We have a few more minutes, I'm sure. Can we go ahead? Do we have you?
Yes, thank you. So I'd like to hear your concrete recommendations when it comes to things like property rights and tenure and some of your expertise on what our options might be going forward. So you mentioned, naturally, we have the coming climate catastrophe, and you mentioned bringing balance to capitalism. So this is something that stood out to me. There's been talk recently about what the U.S.'s role might be in the future that's emerging, and people have put forward something like a Green New Deal. It's yet to be determined what that will actually, contain. But in terms of property rights, I wonder what you think it might contain when we think of something like offshore wind. Who controls those property rights, or something more drastic like government control of certain factories, certain industries, which might need to be heavily regulated or more in a socialistic direction is kind of what I'm getting towards. How do you manage that from a legal perspective? What are your thoughts there?
Great question. All of them are. This is really good discussions, more than worthwhile coming up. And by the way, it was a pleasant trip up on Amtrak. Everybody was very nice on the trip, so it's really is a pleasure to have this discussion. To answer very briefly, I'm a guy who sticks to principles. Okay, I don't worry about tactics, even strategy, too much at first. I just, what are the principles? So if your question is about how do we strategically approach, I'm just trying to crystallize your question so I can respond.
Right, and I guess I'm interested in understanding what those battles might look like from a legal perspective.
Okay. Let's say, and I'm making this up, and this is a bit of a stretch, and you remember the Grameen Bank? Anybody? The Grameen Bank, it's like community banking. Well, this is very popular in Bangladesh, and the Nobel Prize went to Mohammed Yunus, who came up with the Grameen Bank, which is microcredit to these very, very poor, so much of the poor people where they pool their credit together and get common resources, this kind of thing. Well, the reason I'm mentioning this is taken off in South Chicago, where Muhammad Yunus gave a talk and some people heard, and this MacArthur Fellow came on board, and all of a sudden they're doing the community banking. And they had to change some of the regulations in the city code, and then in the, they had to get some lawyers, involved. But they tackled it, and they tried to look at what are the pluses and minuses, how do we help the most people, and do it in a transparent way to make sure people are accountable and that the people impacted are represented in decision making, and that the benefits and concomitant responsibilities are shared appropriately. If you have those principles, again, that's why anywhere, any sector, this is what I've learned in my career. Don't get hung up on the details. Keep to your principles. Right? And does that help answer it at all? When you get into wind, Bob, do you want to jump on this, or Kevin, or anybody else, or friends in the front here at all?
Who has domain over offshore wind? That'd be a good specific question.
Usually it's the government, because we have like 200-mile economic exclusive zones, and then within 12 miles, I think, but it's government-owned, and then the jurisdiction is often related to, are there security concerns with ports? Are there cities right nearby? So it's usually a mosaic of federal, top-down, and then other jurisdictions. I mean, things like Coast Guard and terrorism, and all the stuff with the border wall and all this. So when you start talking wind farms, and it gets complicated quickly.
Yeah, that gives me perspective, and I'll pass this on,
Sure.
but I did want to mention one thing I learned about recently when you mentioned public banking, is in Canada, they're starting to do this through their postal system, and it's incredibly interesting. So I just encourage people to look out for that project. It's fascinating. Yeah.
I have maybe a comment and then maybe followed up by a question. In the last election, 2016, 138 million people voted, which is only about 58% of the people who could vote. So that means there's over 100 million people who didn't vote who could have. So the answer, and that 100 million is more than either candidate got. So if you're talking about community-based resource management, managing the vote seems to be the way to get a real representation, because Thomas Jefferson said, democracy is not a government of the majority, it's the government of the majority who vote. So it goes back to that old pogo thing. We have seen the enemy and they are us. If we can't find a reason to get people to vote. So the real question, it seems to me, is not that climate change isn't important and not that community-based resource management is important, but how the hell do you get people to show up and exercise the one true democratic thing that they can do?
Did you identify yourself? What's your name?
I'm in the Witness Protection Program, so.
Is this an insurance? Yeah, okay. No, listen, again, it warms my heart to have come up from the Grays, industrial New Jersey, and even New Haven, where I went to school, to come up to this beautiful part of the world and to hear this kind of democracy town hall, and Jefferson quoted, and it's what a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. I mean, I couldn't concur more. I have no idea what we do about that. It's like in this country. I worked all overseas. I'm baffled by this country. I have no idea what's going on here. I'm sorry. So I couldn't agree with you more. And that's why I'm so glad, Kevin, that we have some of your students here and these, and such a robust, diverse group here. But please.
On Monday, we had, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm also new to the country. I just arrived in this country last year. I was shocked that there was a national holiday on Monday. I thought it was crazy, so I came into work. And the holiday was President's Day. Why aren't we voting on President's Day? Why don't we have our national day to vote on a public holiday. And then people who have children or who have jobs or whatnot, commitments that might otherwise prevent them from voting, they would have the day off and may actually have nothing else to do but vote. To me, it's such a no-brainer. I mean, why did we have a holiday on Monday for President's Day, but we don't vote for our presidents on a national holiday? It's insane.
Some good perspective. I know it's getting late. We have a couple more. And you had. I'm sorry.
Yeah. My question is, I'm from Slovakia, which is pretty small country and compared with others. And yours, as people know, it's post-Soviet Union, and now it's part of European Union. And you talk about 4 principles that actually should work, but for small countries in Slovakia, and you don't have to go far. You can go to Ukraine. It just doesn't really work. So if you have all the great dictators, as I can call Putin, that fight against these small countries, you can't really use the 4 principles. Or can you? That's my question.
Principles are the best that I can come up with for general guideposts. And as we talked about this afternoon, when you have the forces of corruption that are really ingrained in the politics, in the finances, in the machinery of government, it's really hard to root that out. But go.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about young people, and most of the revolution that happened in the area were done by students and young people, which I think it's pretty amazing. But still, there is not power enough that you can, in such a small country, do something.
Can I just ask you guys back about social media, the internet, and the power of communications? Because we hear a lot of us over 50 or 40 are kind of, again, baffled by that and the power, and we see what's gone wrong with it just recently. But is that part of maybe the solution? Is that part of what can help us address your question? Maybe. Could you say how?
I mean, even now there are protests in Slovakia and are coordinated by social media. So maybe even for something bigger, it could be coordinated. But I don't think that this necessarily have the. Well, you can coordinate people by social media, but I'm not really sure how far away you can get only by such a coordination. And there are just organizations in America, maybe in other countries, that are big enough and have a power enough. So maybe just our European Union is big enough. But what about small countries that don't have the support and don't have the power to do something?
Fair enough. Can you hand the microphone to Bob? Bob, can you turn that on and please enlighten us? Maybe this can be the last one or two.
Right. I just wanted to thank you for all that you've been sharing and your many thoughts, and just a couple quick rejoinders to some of the discussion. My name is Bob Winterbottom. I'm living over in Stoddard, New Hampshire, but as Kirk mentioned, we've had quite some time together. And I would just reinforce that there's 2 things that are particularly upsetting to me right now. One is that people that are entrusted to serve the public interest are not serving the public interest. They're serving special interests, or they're serving the needs of the wealthy, and so on. And until we can restate some sort of, whether it's the accountability, hold them accountable to that, or shed some more transparency on, who they're really representing and how they're doing. I think, and then that's related to the second point that's very troubling to me now. It's so hard to sort out the information and the disinformation, because people are so skillful about, whether you call it fake news or whatever, it's very confusing now to sort of know what to believe, because truth has been so banged up. And some of it's, very deliberate, some of it's sort of innocently. And we've been slow to respond to climate change because there's been such a huge campaign for all these years by the fossil fuel industries and others undermining it. Al Gore had it all figured out years ago, but systematically sabotaged and undermined. But related to that, we're living in a world where, things are complex, and we all have to sort of take the time to sort of, be a little bit skeptical and really take things down and take them apart. I think that's one reason why things work often better at the local level, because you can sort things out a little bit. You can sort of find out what's really fact, what's really people's interest. You can the accountability, the transparency, all those kind of things. Institutions can be better organized at the local level in ways that they can work. As you scale things up and put people in charge, it gets harder and harder. And then just a point of fact, about the complexity issue, I work a lot on wood fuels and in forestry. And it's true what you were saying, about, our society, broadly speaking, we've advanced a lot by not still being dependent on firewood and charcoal and so on. But that's not the case for the entire world. Most everybody doesn't live like we do in terms of energy dependence, as you know. In the African countries where I'm working, typically it's still 80% dependent on wood fuels, on charcoal, firewood, other biomass. But right. But the related point, that's driving deforestation, contributing to climate change, and so on. That's not really the case. There's been some very good studies done recently by people at Yale and others that are pointing out that about 70-75% of the wood fuel use around the world, particularly in developing countries, is sustainable. It's from women and children collecting, small diameter wood along hedgerows and border plantings, things that are regenerating, trees that grow right back. It's sustainable harvesting of wood that they use to, cook and use at the household level. There's about 30% of that wood fuel use in Africa and so on that is problematic because it's being driven to supply charcoal demand in urban centers and so on. And why is that being unsustainable? Because you get involved with corruption. Because the Forest Service starts to put a ban on it, but then they look the other way if you pay them, and so on. And so there's pockets where it's unsustainable, and it's often because it's tied to corruption in institutions and things like that. But given some scope, some devolution of authority, people work in their best interest. They don't want to be running out of wood fuel. They don't want it to be a source of degradation. They want to be able to have an environment that meets their needs for sustainable food production, for water, for a whole range of things, and for continual supplies of fuel that are well managed and that are renewed, and the systems that are out there that innovative farmers themselves are sort of scaling up on their own. Are systems that achieve multiple objectives because they're contributing to better use of and renewal of all these ecosystem services. You can have trees on your farm that are producing fodder at the same time they're producing wood, at the same time they're fixing nitrogen to improve your crop production, and so on and so on. These are given the right incentives, a little bit of economic incentive, a little bit of empowerment in terms of the right governance and enabling conditions and other things. People tend to move down a pathway that's going to make the world a better place. And so we just have to sort of figure out where those are and how we can encourage those and how we can, dismantle some of those perverse incentives that create the problems that we can see.
You see, well, why don't we get the last word here from this gentleman? And you can see the intersection here between governance, corruption, transparency, and natural resource management. So the point isn't, sir, that community everything. It's not. That's no panacea, but we need a whole suite of approaches that are appropriate, modern, traditional, community, individual, group, right? So that it's tailored, sir.
So Bob, this is Paul Love from here in Brattleboro. So you were saying that part of the 30% is quite often driven by needing to get charcoal and stuff into urban areas. So it's perhaps one way to counteract that would be to find other ways of providing energy in the urban areas where they don't need charcoal from where it is self-sustaining. How can you work that out either in a community fashion, or does that require a national government to do, or how do you do that?
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for substitutes, and there's a lot of programs that have tried to substitute LPG gas, bottled gas, or there's a lot of opportunities to use more efficient stoves that and things like that. But the most striking example I've come across is in Haiti. Haiti has a reputation of being a country that's been deforested, in large part because of the charcoal demand. Well, there's a new World Bank study that just came out, and you would be surprised to know that Haiti now has more trees than it did in the last 40 years. 40 years ago, they were saying charcoal was going to be the end of Haiti, and you saw the photos comparing Haiti and Dominican Republic and so on. Well, again, farmers that have the rights to their land and see an economic opportunity decided that these prosopis and other bushes that were growing back, this could be a good feedstock for charcoal. They got into the charcoal business. Now charcoal is the second largest value chain of any commodity or crop in Haiti. Second only to mango, but much more so than all the other agricultural export crops and home consumed crops. There's 30% tree cover now in Haiti because it's become a business that's driving hundreds of millions of dollars a year in the economy, and they've been able to sustain at a level of like 80% of their household need is still coming from charcoal. And there have been NGOs that have, it's a devolution of rights, all the things that Kirk works on in terms of getting the right governance environment. But in this case, it's not so much common property management as it is just each little individual entrepreneur. He has, the freedom. He's not, like in some African countries where the Forest Service is fining them and doing this and that. They can make their money and they can do it in a sustainable way. And it's the road network that's been so much improved that now there's so many more areas that are accessible to those markets. It's interesting how things work out, but you need to have an open mind and sort of, keep figuring out and give people a little bit of space to use their better instincts to improve their lives in ways that are sustainable, and it sometimes can work.
Good, so we got a very good discussion there and some real expertise there on that. I think we better close off now, but I'm going to stay around to have some more discussion, but I just wanted to finish. We did mention up here in the front row about solar energy in Africa and elsewhere, wind energy we touched on. So there's so many alternatives, and Bob has touched on a really nice, thoughtful response here, taking a little case study about how charcoal, wood can be seen in a more understanding light, rather than good or bad. And that's part of the nuance that I've tried to keep to tonight. And I just want to end by just asking you all to give yourselves a hand, but particularly to Marlborough College, and who brought me up here, and to your Windham leadership. Thank you so much.
We are very grateful for your great lecture and contribution. I only hope that similar lectures and similar discussion will take place in many more churches, temples, synagogues, mosques, and we can educate our younger children about all the issues discussed here and educate them for a better world and better future for humanity. Thank you for coming. Enjoy yourself. Drive carefully. There is snow all over there. Be well. Good night.